The Opal by Gustav Meyrink. The opal on Miss Hunt's finger excited general admiration. I inherited it from my father, who was an old Bengal hand. It used to belong to a Brahmin, she said, stroking the big gleaming stone with her fingertips. You only see such fire in Indian jewels. Whether it is the way they are cut or a trick of the light, I don't know. But sometimes the shine has a kind of movement about it, restless, like a living eye. Like a living eye, repeated Mr. Hargrave Jennings thoughtfully. Does that remind you of something, Mr. Jennings? They talked about concerts, balls, the theatre, all sorts of things, but the conversation kept coming back to the Indian opal. I could tell you something about these stones, these so-called stones, Mr. Jennings conceded at last, but I fear Miss Hunt would find that the pleasure she enjoys in her ring would be spoiled forever. But if you care to wait a moment, I'll look out the manuscript from my papers. The party waited in great suspense. Are you ready? What I'm going to read is an extract from my brother's travel notebook. We decided at the time not to publish our experiences. So, near Mahabalipur, the jungle comes down in a narrow strip nearly to the sea. The waterways have been canalized by the government from Madras almost to Trichinopoly, but the interior is unexplored wilderness, impenetrable, and a hotbed of fever. Our expedition had just arrived, and the dark-skinned Tamil servants were unloading the tents, crates, and the rest of the baggage from the boats, in order to have them carried by native porters to the cliff-top town of Mahabalipur, through the maze of rice paddies, out of whose rippling sea of green odd groups of palmyra palms rose like islands. Colonel Sturt, my brother Hargrave, and I immediately took up residence in one of the little temples cut, or rather carved out of the living rock, which are a true marvel of old Dravidian architecture. The unexampled work of Indian piety, they must have borne witness to centuries of hymns sung in praise of the great Saviour by his inspired devotees. Now they serve the Brahmin cult of Shiva, along with the 7 sacred pagodas with their tall pillared halls hewn out of the rocky ridge above. Dank mists rose from the plain, hanging over the rice paddies and meadows, and blurring the rainbow outlines of the homeward-plodding buffaloes harnessed into their rough-built Indian carts, an odd mixture of light and mysterious gloom that lay heavily on the senses, like a magic haze of jasmine and lilac blossoms lulling the soul into dreams. Our Mahratta sepoys, in their wild and picturesque costumes and red and blue turbans, pitched their camp in the ravine below the path up to the rocks, while up above the crash of the waves echoed from the open halls of the pagodas strung out in a line along the coast, like a bellowing sea hymn in praise of Shiva, the universal destroyer. As dusk fell behind the hills and the night wind began to blow through the old halls, the sound of the waves swelled up to us even louder and more thunderous. The servants had brought torches to our temple and then gone down again to their people in the village. We set out to explore all the nooks and corners by the flickering light. Numerous dark passageways ran through the rock, and fantastic statues of gods in dancing poses, palms outstretched and with fingers curled in mysterious gestures, cast their shadows across the entrances, guarding the threshold. How few people they are who know what mysteries of unimaginable depth beyond the comprehension of us Westerners are signified by these bizarre figures in their sequence and relation to one another, and by the number and height of the pillars and lingams. Hargrave showed us one such ornament set up on a pedestal, a staff with 24 knotted ropes tied along its length, each cord hanging down on either side and divided at the ends, a representation of the human spinal cord. Nearby were images illustrating the ecstasies and transcendental states opened up to the yogi on his path towards miraculous powers, as he fixes his thoughts and feelings on each successive section of the staff. This Pingala, great river of sun, explained Akil Rao, our interpreter, in his broken English. Colonel Sturt caught my arm. Quiet. Do you hear that? We tensed and listened for a sound in the direction of the passage obscured by a colossal statue of the goddess Kali Bhairab. The torches crackled. Otherwise nothing. A lowering silence, raising the hair on our necks as our very souls quivered, trembling for that fearful lightning bolt that would stab like an explosion into our lives, and inexplicably startle all the fatal spectres of the unknown out of their dark corners and hiding places. At such moments, fear gasps from the rhythmic hammering of one's heart, like words, resembling the awful gobblings of the deaf and dumb. Gain, ga, gain. But we strained our ears in vain. Everything was silent. "It sounded like a shriek from the bowels of the earth," whispered the colonel. I had a sense that the great statue of Kali Bhairab, the cholera demon, was on the move. The monster's 6 arms trembled in the uncertain light of the torches, and her black and white painted eyes rolled like a madwoman's. "Let's get out into the open, by the entrance," suggested Hargrave. "This is a frightful place." The town among the rocks lay spread out in the green light like a petrified incantation. The moon shone across the sea in a broad stripe, a huge glowing sword, its point vanishing in the distance. We lay down to rest on the platform. There was no wind, and soft sand had accumulated in quiet corners, but sleep was hard to find. The moon rose higher in the sky, and the shadows of the pagodas and the stone elephants shriveled across the white rock surface until they were no more than fantastic toad shapes. "Before the Moguls came, all these statues are supposed to have been loaded with jewels," said Colonel Sturt suddenly to me. "Emerald necklaces, eyes made of onyx, and opal," he spoke quietly, unsure whether I was asleep. I made no reply. Suddenly we all started awake in terror. A horrible scream had issued from the temple, a brief howl, or a kind of laugh, echoing like metal or breaking glass. My brother tore a chunk of blazing wood from its place on the wall, and we forced ourselves to go down the passageway into the darkness. There were 4 of us. What had we to fear? Hargrave soon threw his torch down, for the corridor opened out into an artificially cut but roofless defile, where the moon cast a harsh illumination, leading us on into a grotto. The light of a fire was visible behind the pillars. We made our way forward in the shadows. Flames were rising from a low sacrificial altar, and in their glow a fakir could be seen swaying from side to side, hung about with strings of bones and dressed in the multicolored rags of a devotee of Bengali Durga. He was in the middle of reciting an incantation, and in the manner of a dancing dervish was rolling his head rapidly from left to right and then back and forth, his white teeth glinting in the light, and all the time emitting a kind of sobbing whimper. 2 decapitated corpses lay on the ground at his feet. By their clothing we recognized them at once to be the bodies of 2 of our sepoys. It must have been their death cries that had echoed so dreadfully up to us. Colonel Sturt and the dragoman threw themselves on the fakir, but in the same instant he flung them off, and they staggered against the wall. The strength residing in this emaciated ascetic was quite unimaginable, and before we could run to their aid, he had already reached the grotto entrance. We found the severed heads of the 2 Mahrattas behind the stone. Mr. Hargrave Jennings folded his paper together, adding, "There's a page missing here, but I can tell you the end of the story." The expression on the faces of the victims was beyond description. My heart still misses a beat when I think of the horror that overcame us all. It would be wrong to call it fear in those fellows' features. It was more like a mad, distorted grin. Their lips and nostrils were drawn up, the mouth wide open, and the eyes, it was awful. Imagine the eyes popping out, showed neither iris nor pupil, but they shone and glistened, just like the stone here on Miss Hunt's ring. And when we examined them more closely, you could see that they had turned into genuine opals. A chemical analysis later gave the same result. But how those eyeballs could have changed into opals is still a total mystery to me. I asked a high Brahmin about it, and he said it could be done with tantras, and that the process was almost instantaneous, starting from the brain. But who is going to believe that? He added that all Indian opals come from the same source, and that they bring bad luck to anyone who wears them, since they are all exclusively and forever dedicated to the goddess Durga, the destroyer of all organic life. The listeners sat dumbfounded, spellbound by the story. Miss Hunt played with her ring. "Do you think opals really bring bad luck for that reason, Mr. Jennings?" she said at last. "If you do please destroy the stone." Mr. Jennings took a sharp iron paperweight from the table and hammered gently at the opal until it shattered into shimmering, pearly shards.